Welcome to The Contagious Mind. I'm Mike Adams, the author and the narrator, you might say, although I'm not reading a script here. This is going to be a casual conversation about an astonishing subject that will probably alter your perception of reality for the rest of your life. In this audiobook and also printed downloadable PDF, you can get them all for free. And by the way, the URL for that is audiobooks.naturalnews.com. You're going to learn about consciousness and the fabric of reality. You're going to learn information that you probably never heard before. You're going to learn how organized systems communicate over time and space without using technology. That is, nothing material. There are ways to share knowledge without using email or the internet or cell phones or even your voice. And this knowledge that I'm about to reveal here will lead humanity to the defeat of evil, and it will promote human freedom not only across our planet but throughout the cosmos. This is a method to break through censorship, to break through tyrannical controls over speech and attempts to suppress knowledge, which is what Google is. Google is a knowledge suppression engine, not a search engine. The same thing is true about Wikipedia and the mainstream media, Facebook and YouTube and so on. They're all about suppressing knowledge. Well, what if you learned a way around that did not require technology, a method that you could use right now, today, in your own home without spending a dime, without even having an internet connection? Before we get started, just want to mention I'm the author of 2 other audiobooks that you can download for free. And those 2 books are Survival Nutrition, which teaches you how to use food, herbs, superfoods, molecules, and substances to enhance your preparedness and survival, wound healing, cognitive function, and so on. And then also the Global Reset Survival Guide, which gives you just a hugely valuable assortment of information about how to survive financial collapse, a food supply collapse, an EMP attack, a grid down scenario. If you want to survive all those things, check out the Global Reset Survival Guide. All right, now, jumping into chapter 1, which I call Morphic Resonance. And this is the title of a book by Rupert Sheldrake, who is an extraordinary scientist and investigator I'll talk about. But if you want to get his book, Morphic Resonance, it will definitely help explain some of what I'm covering here. However, that's just the beginning of this book. You're going to find out some amazing things as we move forward. So let's start with xylitol, which is a natural sweetener. And you probably are familiar with this. It's in crystalline form. And maybe you've chewed on gum that's sweetened with xylitol, or maybe you've heard about xylitol as a really nice alternative to sugar, because xylitol doesn't promote tooth decay. In fact, it helps prevent it. So something mysterious happened to xylitol that tells us something about cosmic consciousness. Now, I'm going to read from you excerpts from a letter from a couple of scientists, one of whom is named Walter C. McCrone from McCrone Associates, Inc. in Chicago, Illinois. He wrote a letter that was published in the Journal of Applied Crystallography, Volume 8, 1975, page 342. Here's what he said. That xylitol was first prepared in 1891, and it was considered a liquid, not a crystal, just a liquid until 1941 or 1942, when at that time a new crystalline form appeared in the liquid. In other words, the liquid started growing crystals spontaneously. And this new crystalline form would melt at 61 degrees Celsius. These experiments were successfully repeated by Carson, Weisbrot, and Jones in 1943. And during those experiments, another crystallization form began to appear in the liquid. This new form was a more durable crystal, and again, it was spontaneous. And it would melt at 94 degrees Celsius. So here we had suddenly, a high temperature resistant form of the crystal. According to the letter from McCrone, quote, subsequent attempts to prepare the lower melting form were unsuccessful. Now, these 2 different forms of crystals use the same elements. It's the same, xylitol is a complex sugar, and The same molecules are used in that molecular lattice. It's just that the molecules arrange themselves differently. That's called polymorphism, when you have the same elements that are arranged differently into a molecule. Now, from the letter from Macron, quote, there are many instances, some reported in the literature and many others not, of crystalline compounds behaving respectively for many months or years until the nucleation of a more stable form. Now, what he means by nucleation of a more stable form is that suddenly this other, more stable or heat-resistant form suddenly appears for no explainable reason. After this occurs, the previously obtained crystal form cannot be made to crystallize even in laboratories many miles away. He continues, quote, we have recently encountered such an event and became interested in the prevalence of such behavior. The results were so interesting to us that we felt your readers might be equally interested. And then this letter goes on to explain all of the different molecules, including sugars and also antibiotics, pharmaceuticals, that spontaneously began to form new crystal structures for no apparent reason. And when they did so, the new crystalline structure spontaneously appeared in every laboratory around the world. And in none of those labs could they ever go back to the previous form. So Macron goes on to explain, this phenomenon is widespread. Most interesting to us is the fact that once one laboratory has recrystallized a compound, either for the first time or in a more stable form, other laboratories were able to do so. It is, quote, as though the seeds of crystallization had been carried upon the winds from end to end of the earth. Now, in the book Morphic Resonance, then Rupert Sheldrake talks about a pharmaceutical company, and as well as another chemical company. As Sheldrake reports, a company was operating a factory which grew large crystals of ethylene diamine tartrate from solution in water. From this plant, it shipped the crystals many miles to another, which cut and polished them for industrial use. So a year after the factory opened, the crystals in the growing tanks began to grow badly. The crystals of something else were adhering to them, something which grew even more rapidly. The affliction soon spread to the other factory. The cut and polished crystals acquired the malady on their surfaces. The wanted material was anhydrous ethylene diamine tartrate, and the unwanted material turned out to be the monohydrate of that substance. But during 3 years of research and development and another year of manufacturing, no seed of the monohydrate had formed. And after that, the new form seemed to be everywhere. Now, ritonavir. This was an AIDS drug made by Abbott Laboratories, and it was introduced in the marketplace in 1996. This drug had been on the market for about 18 months when chemical engineers found a previously unknown polymorph. In other words, the molecules in the drug were suddenly forming a different structure, a different crystalline structure. No one knew what had caused the change, and the Abbott team could not stop the new polymorph from forming. Within a few days of its discovery, it was dominating the production lines. Now, although the two polymorphs had the same chemical structure, that is, the same number of elements per molecule, the second form was only half as soluble as the first, which means that people taking the drug obviously weren't absorbing the dose that they thought they were. Eventually, Abbott had to withdraw ritonavir from the market, and they launched a crash program to try to get back its original polymorph. It spent hundreds of millions of dollars on this process and lost an estimated $250 million in sales in the year the drug was withdrawn. Then the company finally decided to just reformulate the drug as a capsule containing the drug in solution. So, what we just went over are many examples of molecules that seemingly have some kind of memory, you might say, but that's just a metaphor. They don't really have neurology, obviously. These are just simple molecules, inorganic molecules in many cases. So how is it happening that molecules in a lab halfway across the world that are in a liquid will suddenly form crystals after a different lab somewhere else formed crystals? How is that happening? How is this knowledge of organization and structure being communicated? And how is it being transported, you can say, across the world to the other vat of liquid? And how is that vat of liquid reading this information to form a new crystalline structure? The answers tell us something extraordinary about the fabric of the cosmos. According to Rupert Sheldrake, this is because there does exist something called morphic resonance, which means there is a habit in nature. And this habit allows not just molecules, but complex life forms, plants, animals, human beings, and even the human mind. Allows all of us to share solutions that were achieved previously by another member of the same species. This goes all the way from molecules and elements up to complex life forms in the human mind. And this is something that materialist science would insist does not exist. There is an extraordinary amount of evidence that this is happening not only with crystals, but other life forms. So let's start moving up the chain of complexity and get into living organisms. Where else do we see this idea of morphic resonance? And because I live out in the country, we have at certain times of the year a lot of spiders that build intricate webs. Now, spiders are born with this ability, and this behavioral capability cannot be explained by the genetics of these spiders. There's nowhere in the genes that describes the behavior of what is a web. But spiders innately recognize what a web is. They know how to build it innately. But just about any damage to this web is repaired by the spider because the spider detects that something is wrong. It's no longer a hole. So the question here is, how did they learn to build a web? How do they know how to repair a web or to traverse their own web? The answer is morphic resonance. The answer is that spiders are able to build these webs with incredible precision and artistry even, because there have been trillions of spiders before them that already built such webs. There is an imprinting of organization, of knowledge, that is, in essence, written into the cosmos in something I call cosmic consciousness. And then not only can life forms tap into that, but even non-living substances such as molecules can use knowledge from previous molecules. And in fact, it's not just that they choose to do so because they're not alive, it's that they cannot help but do so. And that's why scientists in the chemical labs are never able to go back to the earlier forms of those crystalline molecules. You can't go back because this is the advancement of more complex knowledge, more organization, more intelligence, you might say. And these organizations can exist in social constructs, in physical constructs, behavioral constructs, energetically, and much more. So far we've only talked about now molecules and spiders. When an insect solves a problem, that solution becomes available to other insects of the same species. Now, we see this also in ants. So ants are incredibly good at repairing their structures, their ant homes or ant mounds. And if you damage an ant mound, the ants work to repair it in a way that defies anything described by genetics. And that pattern is inscribed in the cosmos. It's inscribed in fabric of reality using morphic resonance. And there are many examples of that even in sports. For example, it was long believed in sports that it would be impossible for humans to run a 4-minute mile. But then when one person broke that record, that solution became available to many other people, and all kinds of people broke that record. And now today, it's very common for people to run under a 4-minute mile. There's a saying that says when you solve a problem in your mind, it's often said that you crystallize ideas. And you might have random thoughts or ideas, you're trying to solve a problem in your mind, and then suddenly the solution becomes apparent in your own mind, and it forms a kind of new crystalline structure. When that happens, that crystalline structure is imprinted in the cosmic consciousness, and it immediately becomes accessible by other human beings. And this is why, by the way, throughout history, many inventions have been discovered simultaneously by several different inventors who then each accuse the other one of stealing their inventions. What happens is the minute that one inventor solves the idea in his head, that is shared through this mechanism that we're talking about. It is shared with all the other inventors, even if they don't realize it consciously. Unconsciously, they now have access to this solution, this new information, this kind of cosmic database. And then, they think, oh, I just solved this problem. That's my invention. And then they file for a patent, even though the other guy filed for a patent already. And then they're in a patent battle because they both came up with it on their own, they believe. In truth, knowledge is always shared, and it is shared instantaneously across every member of the species. So you understand that if you solve a problem just in your mind, even if you never speak it out, although words can add power, but even if you never speak of it, the idea still is transmitted to others and becomes available as part of the database of human knowledge. And there are many cases of this phenomenon taking place, mentioned by Sheldrake, about teaching people Morse code. Turns out that if you teach people Morse code, but you take another group and you teach them a fictional version of Morse code, which is where the dots and dashes are just scrambled into a kind of a different pattern. And assuming that both these groups, they don't know what's the right answer to Morse code, but you're teaching the two groups two different types of Morse code, the group that learns the, quote, real Morse code learns it more quickly. Why? Because that's the pattern of Morse code that has been mastered and solved by millions of other people before that person. So there is, in effect, an imprinting of Morse code in this cosmic database of human knowledge. And the same thing is true with learning to type. So today we have the standard keyboard layout, which is the QWERTY layout, QWERTY, starting from the upper left of the keyboard. This layout was designed early on so that mechanical typewriters would not get jammed by people typing consecutively letters that would often appear next to each other in words. Well, if those letters were next to each other on the mechanical keyboard, then those metal heads that actually strike the ink ribbon would tend to get jammed. So the QWERTY keyboard layout was designed to separate commonly used letter sequences as much as possible. Well, in the electronic age, that doesn't need to happen at all because we're no longer, having metal heads striking ink ribbons on paper. So what happens if you try to teach people a new layout? So there are other layouts of keyboards, such as the Dvorak layout. And it turns out that if you take people who don't know how to type at all, and you teach one group of people the QWERTY layout, and you teach another group of people the Dvorak layout, which is supposed to be more efficient, guess which one they learn more quickly? They learn the QWERTY layout more quickly, because that's the layout that's imprinted. So human knowledge is not just in the brain. This is what's important to understand here. It's not just in the mind. Human knowledge is shared through what I'm going to call, and this is my own term, not Sheldrake's term, but you know how in modern technology we have something called cloud computing? I'm going to call this morphic resonance phenomenon, I'm going to call it God's cloud computing. In essence, if we consider God to be the creator of the universe, and then God created a cloud computing platform, a kind of cosmic knowledge sharing database, or what's called a knowledge base, for not just humanity, but for animals and plants and molecules. And this system is working all the time in the background. You can't turn it off. You can't help but receive ideas from other people who have solved problems. And if you solve a problem, you can't help but transmit that idea. And why is that? We're going to get to that in a later chapter, but it's because the human mind, combined with the physical brain, is both a transmitter and a receiver of information, of holistic information. Whatever you are thinking is being transmitted, and whatever you are feeling may be influenced by what you are receiving. Now, mothers know this about their children, and mothers know that there's something called a mother's intuition. A mother knows when their child may be in distress. And at a young age, mothers know when their child is hungry. And this isn't just an issue of timing. This has been done experimentally to show this happens even when the child is spontaneously, at random times seemingly, suddenly hungry. Miles away, the mother will feel that in her breast. So there's a physiological component of this communication between mother and child. This is the shared database of knowledge. Now, in the realm of science, if you dare talk about such subjects, it's called things like supernatural or parapsychology. Supernatural means beyond natural, and parapsychology means adjacent to, or pseudo-psychology, I guess you could say. But what if that's not the case at all? What if this phenomenon is entirely natural? What if this is, in fact, so natural that every bug, every spider, every ant adheres to this phenomenon? It's as natural as gravity. It's incredibly natural. In fact, it's ubiquitous. It's everywhere. And if you go back and look at anthropological studies of, let's say, low-tech tribes, they use this method of communication. And I bet you would find this in some Native American Indian lore as well. But in some cultures, when the men go out to hunt and they kill an animal, the tribal people back at the camp, the base camp, they know instantly that the animal hunt has been successful. And they're already celebrating and everything because they already knew, because of this cosmic internet, God's cloud computing platform, you might say. Now we get to the question of how does a human egg, when joined by the sperm, and suddenly there's this actual spark of life, there's an actual flash of light at that moment. Suddenly this is a living being, even though at that point it's only 2 cells. And then the 2 become 4, and then the 4 become 8, and so on. And over time, you end up with what? How many trillion cells in the human body? How do those cells know which part to be? How does the body know to fill out the pattern of a body? And the answer is not that it's in genetics, because it isn't. Genetics is the smallest part of what determines a whole being. There's something else that's far more important than genetics, and the answer is this: morphic resonance. These morphic fields contain, around the sperm and egg when they join, is projected or imagined, is the definition of a whole adult human being. And from that moment forward, as those cells divide, they are just beginning to fill out the whole adult body. Even right before the infant is born, that infant has the energy grid, you could say, or the polymorphism of an adult human being, which defines the potential and the patterns and the structure of what that infant is going to grow into. And that phenomenon also exists in other animals and other plants. Now, some animals are able to regenerate entire limbs when those limbs are lost. So salamanders are one of those animals. And you may have heard this, that if a salamander has a leg cut off, salamander can regrow the entire limb. How does a salamander's body know where to put cells in order to regrow a lost limb? The answer is the same as the answer of how a spider creates a web. The salamander has in its mind the concept of what is a whole salamander, and the body's cells are simply pushing out and dividing and filling in the lattice work to recreate the whole salamander, which includes this lost leg. And so they regrow it. Before very long, dentistry will probably be able to regrow teeth as long as the nerve is still alive. Now, it's not instant, it takes time, but there's no reason why we can't regrow teeth or regrow limbs or even regrow severed spinal cords. What if we could have, across the whole planet, people who are paralyzed could be able to spontaneously heal and walk again? I believe that day may be coming. So kind of the overview of where we are right now so far in this book is understanding that we exist in a cosmic system of knowledge. Your mind is a broadcast system and a receiving antenna. But your mind itself is non-material, and it is above the brain, and it is able to send and receive information through God's cloud computing platform. Now, we are both creating and reading from morphic fields all the time. in everything that we do. There is this community consciousness that's very real, this knowledge base of shared information. And this knowledge base can be weaponized against us, but it can also be used to achieve incredible liberty and freedom for humanity and to defeat evil and defeat oppression and defeat tyranny. Now, you can add power to your ideas by adding the spoken word to them. And I think in Genesis even, God used the power of the word to create everything that is. So what is this about the power of the word? When you speak something, I think it makes a deeper imprint in the morphic resonance database system. So in other words, to think something may be a breakthrough, and that's wonderful, but to speak it suddenly adds more power to it, and it makes that structure, I think, more rigorous. And I believe that this extends to other ways of expression. If you can draw it on a whiteboard or a piece of paper, there's something about that makes it more of a reality. It's cause and effect. This is the way the universe works. It's like gravity. Now, importantly, once these new ideas are crystallized, they can be invoked with what I call sympathetic resonance. Now, corporations and governments exploit this phenomenon to try to imprint you with ideas that may increase their profitability or increase their control over you. So in other words, corporations and governments, even though they may not be aware of all of this, they have found ways to use this, shall we call it, phenomenon, we'll say. They've found ways to use it to achieve their own goals, even though they're not interested in human freedom. But corporations, especially back in the 1960s and 70s and 80s, they knew that if they could sing an idea and turn it into a piece of music, that would add even more power to the morphic resonance. So, you know how we've talked about thinking something and then speaking something and then drawing something. Well, what if you sing it also? This is actually forming a morphic field across the population so that these songs and these words and these ideas become familiar to people for reasons that they may not even be consciously aware of. Interestingly, I think if corporations had more knowledge of how morphic fields worked, they could do a much better job of forming them. And I'm glad they don't have this knowledge, by the way, because corporations, by and large, are pretty evil. Some, I believe, satanic influence that's in the world today. There is an epic battle of good versus evil, and some of the evil elements are using morphic field programming techniques to try to destroy human knowledge and enslave the human race. So the upshot of this section here is that when we wish to create morphic fields and share this with others and help seed these ideas into the world, number one is to realize that people like you and I, we are the seeders of new ideas. We are the sculptors of the morphic fields. We are shaping the consciousness of the cosmos based on the new ideas that we form in our minds and then express through multiple layers. And the more layers that we add to that, such as speaking or drawing or singing or even acting or sculpting, any representation of our ideas that adds another dimension to it enhances the power of it. And remember, we can do all these things in our own homes. And so what this means is that we need to understand that we are seeding the world with our ideas, which means we need to be deliberate in what ideas we are putting out there or what problems we are solving. We need to defeat evil. We need to overcome problems in the world. And that means it's important to acknowledge that they exist and then to publicize solutions that make those problems disappear over time. So I'm never going to say you should always just think positive. No, sometimes you need to acknowledge the negative that's out there, but then find a way to defeat it or resolve it or overcome it or, some way to transform it into something that is positive. So you're not going to hear me say, just always think positive. That's not going to serve you very well. Sometimes you do have to deal with obstacles and you have to solve those. And it's the solutions that other people need in the world, because other people are facing probably very similar problems and obstacles to what you encountered as well. But the more different layers or dimensions that you bring into this effort, the more powerful your thought force is going to be. And this is why when you go back and you think about a lot of indigenous cultures around the world, in pop culture today, it's often referred to this Indian rain dance. Apparently, you would have Native American Indians who are dancing around and calling on rain. Now, at first, if you're a materialist, you might think, well, that's silly. Rain is determined by, meteorological events. You can't dance and make rain. What if you could? See, because dance is one more layer of expression. So the Native Americans, number one, were thinking of rain, and then they were speaking because they were singing, and then they were dancing, which means they're physically acting out the idea of rain. So they're bringing in like 3 or 4 dimensions into this. Can they actually bring rain to their region by calling on it through these multiple vectors? The real question is, can they invoke the morphic field that is consistent with rainfall? Can they alter something that is physical through morphic fields? Absolutely yes, in the same way that the salamander can regrow a limb into the morphic field, or the same way that the mother knows that her infant needs food and she feels it in her breast. That's a physiological change because of the morphic resonance with her child. I believe that Native Americans weren't wasting their time with this. I think they actually had found a system of communicating with nature. And there are many other examples like this across indigenous populations: Australian Aborigines, Taiwan Aborigines, the Amazonian populations, in South America, the native Indians of the Amazon. And much of Chinese medicine, for example, is in fact invoking morphic resonance in your body by looking at the way your body distributes energy. For example, acupuncture points are all about this. And acupuncture is very efficacious and extremely safe as well. This is why acupuncture works, because morphic resonance is real. And you can, through a skilled practitioner, you can directly reprogram the morphic fields of a body if they are, say, out of alignment or not full of vibrancy or vitality. You can invoke healing and repatterning in parts of the body through acupuncture. Now, getting on the Christian side of things, what about prayer? What is prayer? Well, prayer is verbalizing your intent, asking God to, in essence, intervene and bring a solution to a problem or bring an outcome into reality. Well, when you speak these things, are you not programming the morphic fields that are themselves God's cloud computing platform? So what if when you pray, you're not necessarily praying to God, you're praying with God? In other words, God already created a system that answers your prayers. He already created it. It's been around since the beginning of time. When you pray, you are simply invoking that system. You're using the power that God wove into the fabric of the cosmos. And the way you know that you're successful through these multiple dimensions or layers of getting this out there is that other people will suddenly have the same idea because of you. Other people will have the same idea, and it will reach a 100th monkey kind of effect that even the deep state won't be able to stop it. That wraps up about chapter 1. Remember that these morphic fields can also be weaponized against us, and there are efforts underway by evil entities to block them, to, in other words, separate you from God's cloud computing. We'll talk about that in subsequent chapters. We'll talk about how technology and media are actually used to distract you and move you away from morphic resonance, and then how to use your deliberate focus to achieve these important aims for the world. And then finally, we're also going to talk about how to clear your own mind, and it will allow you to be able to access morphic fields more clearly and also to program them as well. So you want to do good in the world? You want to be a positive influencer? This is how you do it. The key to unlocking one of the greatest secrets of the cosmos is already within your possession, yet few know of its existence. Alongside gravity, atomic forces, and electromagnetism, there exists a universal phenomenon called morphic resonance. Morphic resonance cannot be suppressed by authoritarian tyrants, nor controlled by big tech censorship. The ability to think and share knowledge is the ultimate refuge of freedom. You can learn how to invoke morphic resonance, to learn and share information while promoting freedom on a truly cosmic scale. To do so, you'll need to understand how morphic resonance works. My name is Mike Adams, and I've recorded a 7-hour audiobook that you can download for free. It's called The Contagious Mind, and it lays out the full details of how morphic resonance works, why it can't be stopped, and how to use it to overcome censorship and oppression while promoting liberty and the free exchange of important ideas for humanity. Get it all at thecontagiousmind.com.